before we start with tonight's talk, I want to spend just a moment or two with a little tribute to George Dixon, who we laid to rest in Old Inverallen Cemetery yesterday. George, an incredible man with a brain that was like an encyclopedia. He just remembered things, and I wish I could remember all that he told me and all that he told our meetings here. He spent much of his time in Stirling rather than in Grantown, because that's where his work was, that's where his records were, but he was a very frequent visitor to Grantown, and whenever there was a society meeting, George would come up, especially for it. He has done a tremendous amount of work, particularly on Grantown and the surrounding area, and it's recorded in old notebooks that are getting very fragile, and we're hoping that as part of the George Dixon Trust, as a legacy, we can bring those to Grantown, where we can start digitising them and getting all that information more widely available. Where's he? Oh, there he is. Thank you. So, one of the things that George did with us was he took us on several guided walks, and this one seemed to be particularly appropriate in that we went on a field trip. Now that must have been 30 years ago, but we've always, for a long time, had a particular interest in the Picts, and it's cropped up on our programmes quite a few times, and we're very fortunate tonight that we've got the leading expert on Pictology. What's the study of Picts called? Pictology?
That sounds
fine. Anyway, once upon a time we were very fortunate to have Ian Shepherd here, a name that perhaps rings a bell with Aberdeen ears. We also had Anna Ritchie, another legend from Aberdeen, so we're keeping things going. But as time goes on, we find that we're learning more and more, and this is much more of a more important Pictish settlement than we thought. So with that, we welcome Gordon Noble, Professor Gordon Noble, give the man his proper title, who will take us further into the realms of Picts.
Right, evening everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for missing the Scotland game for us. Hopefully this will be more exciting. So thank you very much for the invite. I realise the title of the talk you've been advertised is maybe not quite what I put together. So we'll end up in Strathspey, but we're going to start off in other sites, and then we'll spiral back to the local area. So first of all, I'd just like to say that we've got a new book out here, which you can see advertised here, available in all good bookshops, probably some bad bookshops as well, but you can get a copy of that. So what we're going to be looking at tonight. Well, I want to kind of bring us back to the development of Pictish society. So they're first mentioned in late Roman sources, and they go on to become these powerful series of kingdoms who occupied northeast Scotland up until about 900 AD. So really setting the foundations for the development of medieval Scotland. So we're going to look at a particular site not too far from here, Rhynie and Tappanoth, and look at the development of a Pictish landscape there. And then we're going to go down to Fife. Any Fifers in the room? No, good. Okay, I can see what I want about Fife. And then we're going to go up to the Moray coast to Burghead. Anyone from Burghead? Yeah. Oh, great. I can slag off them as well. And then we're going to end up in Strathspey. Anyone from Strathspey? Right. So when we think about early Pictland, then we have to think about how this term originated. So it's a term that the Romans first used in AD 297, and it's a nickname essentially. It means the painted people. So this is a term that's been imposed from the outside, but for whatever reason, this does seem to be a term that the Picts used themselves, or at least their neighbours did, right through until the 9th and early 10th century AD. And so it's in this context of an empire on your doorstep that this term originates. And so we had various Roman interventions into what we now recognise as Scotland from the 1st century AD through to the 4th century AD. And it's often in this kind of frontier location that we get these new identities forming. So we find this right across the Roman Empire, this proximity of this Mediterranean empire, this military on your doorstep can lead groups to coalesce as part of resistance, for one, in terms of this new military force being on your doorstep. So as I say, first mentioned in AD 297, the Picts are mentioned right throughout the 4th century AD as raiding the Roman Empire, raiding Roman Britain. Most infamously in AD 367, when they're involved in this event called the Barbarian Conspiracy, and the Picts collude with the Saxons, they collude with the Scots and other barbarian groups, and they raid south of Hadrian's Wall and take over large parts of Roman Britain. And it takes about 2 years for Roman rule to be re-established. So you can see the Picts are quite a formidable entity in Roman Britain. And indeed, that kind of identity was more widely known. So the Picts are mentioned in various official imperial sources. This amazing object, which was on display in the British Museum at their last exhibition, comes from the German frontier, and it's a dice tower. It's for playing games. You drop your dice in and they fall down the steps. And on the frontier it says in Latin, the Picts are defeated, the enemy is destroyed, play in safety. So again, this kind of identity of the Picts as an enemy of Rome is something that went well beyond Britain and was memorialised on this object on the German frontier. But what is our archaeology of Pictland? Well, I think when I first started studying the Picts, which has got about 20 years ago now, people told me not to bother doing archaeology in the Picts because there's nothing to find. And so this was my impression of Pictish archaeology. It was a big black hole. And it is true, when we begin to get the first reference to the Picts, our kind of archaeology of everyday life, things like settlements, etc., really disappears off the page. And it's always been a bit of a puzzle, where can we find Pictish settlements? And so the earlier ideas about the Picts, when they're first mentioned in reference to the Roman sources, was that this was an amalgamation of various tribal groups that were mentioned in the 1st and 2nd centuries, and this was a coming together of various groups, and the Romans calling this new groups the Picts. But because of that lack of settlement evidence, people began to argue the complete opposite, that this was a period of social collapse, and that society took a dark turn, the Dark Ages. So one thing that's became clear, I think, from our recent work is the reason that we have so little Pictish settlement is because the way they began to build their structures, their houses in this time period was something completely different to what went on before. So we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of Iron Age, earlier roundhouse buildings, but the structures we have from the Pictish period were very different. They were rectangular buildings, they were built with turf and stone walls, they didn't have postals, and they probably had cruck frames rather than kind of earth-fast remains, which as you can imagine, doesn't survive very well in the cultivated lowlands. So it's only in these weird locations, like you might have seen our excavations on Dunacair, the sea stack, a few years back. As you can imagine, people didn't cultivate this in more recent years, or they did, but not to a large extent. And here we had survival of buildings of the 3rd and 4th centuries, and this is where we began to realise that the architecture was quite different, and this began to explain why our settlement evidence was quite hard to identify. And then a few years back, we identified this site, or at least we dated it. So this is Tapanoth Hillfort. This is the village of Riney. Down here, on top is this Iron Age Hillfort, so much earlier, about 400 BC. But there's this lower fort here, this wall that comes around here, and then inside there's lots of buildings and structures. And this is Scotland's second largest hill fort here. And when we do laser scanning, LiDAR survey, you can see it looks like the face of the moon, doesn't it? You see all these little pockmarks here. These are platforms built into the hill slope. And so these are all houses or buildings of some kind, and there's 800 of them on this hilltop here. And they date to the 3rd, 4th centuries AD through to the 7th century. So exactly in that time period in which we have this lack of settlement evidence. So you can see overnight, you can identify a site that completely blows our models out of the water in terms of how scarce Pictish settlement is, and how settlement was quite dispersed and it was a low population level. This is almost a kind of urban scale of settlement here. So we excavated this from 2019 to 2022, and we excavated the rampart, which is 1.5 kilometres in circumference. So imagine the amount of resources needed to build that. And then we've dug about 20 houses, so it's still a small sample, but every single one turned out to be quite a complex structure, multiple floor layers, multiple hearths, fireplaces within here. And these weren't, kind of very temporary dwellings. These weren't stances for tents. We've got metalworking evidence. There were casting pins, and they were importing Roman material in the early phases. So we think this is a huge settlement dating to that traditional dark ages, the black hole in which we have no settlement evidence. So it's huge settlement dating to that time period. And this is where our radiocarbon dates are increasingly amazing. You can begin to use things like Bayesian modelling, and you can get dating down to about the generational level or even kind of decadal level with archaeology these days. So this site started sometime in the 3rd century, so that's 200 AD, and went through to about 600 AD. So in that kind of late Roman period in which the Picts are first mentioned, and into the period when we know the first kingdoms are beginning to take shape. And this site overlooks this location here, which is where we actually started our excavations in Riney. And this is a much smaller site. It's tiny, really. It's on this little glacial knoll just to the south of the village of Riney. And it surrounds this stone here that's one of these classic Pictish stones with a salmon and a Pictish beast on it, these kind of paired symbols. And the place name of Riney, anyone from Riney? No? Well, would you know? It's got this royal place name. It means a place associated with a great or a sacred king. So it's not documented, but most of our places in this time period are not documented in our sources. But it's got this place name that suggests some sort of royal power, royal focus here. And that place name is associated with this location to the south of the modern village. And so we investigated this site here that had been identified by aerial photography when Riney Man was found in 1978. And we found what we think is the socket for Riney Man, and he stood at the entranceway to this settlement, as did the Crossdane monument as well. And there were big timber buildings inside, very unusual for this time period, a big wooden fenced enclosure around the site, and there's Tapanoth in the background. And indeed, the kind of material culture that we found, so this is just the stuff that people have thrown away. That's what we find as archaeologists. We find the rubbish that's been left behind. But this is quite telling rubbish in terms of what they were eating and consuming and producing. So we found sherds of this, what's called late Roman amphora, but it's material that comes from the Byzantine Empire in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 5th and 6th century, so after the Romans have withdrawn from Britain. And it finds its way to various sites across southwest Britain and Ireland, usually at documented royal sites. So the Picts at Rhynie were drinking Mediterranean wine, and they were drinking it out of glass vessels that came from western France. And they were producing a huge amount of metalwork. So metalwork was the real status symbol in this time period. This is a non-coin using economy. So wealth was in things like metalwork and cattle and agricultural produce. And so these vessels here, these are kind of stone vessels, were used for refining silver, and it seems to have been largely late Roman silver that they were refining. We've got the tools of production, we've got ingot molds for making the bars that they were trading with. And then again, we're getting the kind of stuff they've thrown away. So these are the molds for making things like silver brooches, big dress, fancy dress accessories that were associated with elite, hand pins, which were kind of for fastening your cloak or sticking in your hair. And they were also making these amazing little animal figurines, and they are the animals of the hunt. There's hounds, and there's a wild boar here, and they resemble the animals you see on the picture stones. So this was the amazing thing about Rhynie, was finding objects that resemble what you see on the carved stones. And then we found things like an axe pin that resembles the axe that the Rhynie man carries, a little plaque that's got a face on it, face of a Pict perhaps. And then we were also finding bits of weaponry as well. And kings and leaders in this time period were essentially leaders in battle as well as being secular and sacred rulers. And at Rhynie, one of the stones is actually decorated with a carving of a warrior carving a spear. So a warrior ethos here. And again, the radiocarbon dates can really pin down the chronology of the site, and it emerged sometime in the 4th century, almost exactly around the years of that big event, the Barbarian Conspiracy, when the Picts were raiding Roman Britain. So this royal centre seems to have its origins in that 4th century context, and it ends somewhere around about 560 AD. And so essentially what we've got in this landscape now is a whole series of sites. There's another one here at Cairnmore of the same date. Multiple sites of the same time period, really of a scale that we hadn't expected. So Tapanoth seems to be the earliest. So it's this huge settlement that seems to give rise to this royal centre down in the lowlands there. So Tapanoth emerging in the 3rd century, the Rhynie enclosures in the 4th century, and this other site in the 5th century. So, what might be the catalyst for the development of this landscape? Well, we often, put the blame at the doorstep of the Romans for these kind of things, and indeed, it does seem like there may well be a cause and effect here. So, as I say, there's been Roman invasions and attempts of conquest within what we now recognise as Scotland from the 1st century AD in the Flavian period, and then various attempts at creating frontier systems, Hadrian's Wall down here, Antonine Wall there in the 2nd century. But it's surprising that in that 1st and 2nd century AD context, in terms of if we look at the settlement patterns within Pictland and Scotland, then we see largely continuity. There's not much change. There doesn't seem to be a huge effect on everyday life. But after these campaigns of Severus, which happened after a series of agreements apparently were broken between the Caledonii and the Meatai, the predecessors of the Picts and the Romans. Emperor Severus turns up in AD 208 to perform various punitive campaigns in this time period. And these weren't attempts at conquest, they were attempts to basically kill as many people as possible. And it's after these events, within the generations of those events, that we see those big changes in everyday life and settlement form. So I think this series of campaigns must have had a huge effect on how society was formulated within the areas that became the heartlands of Pictland. And after this campaign, there's no major attempt by the Romans to enact conquest in the area that becomes Pictland. So it's maybe this withdrawal that allows centres like Rhynie to crystallise and come to fruition beyond the kind of influence of the Roman military. And I think we can see this in terms of the kind of iconography we begin to get from the late Roman period. We seem to begin to see images of warriors. Weaponry becomes a more obvious aspect of material culture. So at Rhynie, for example, we saw that the warrior carving. This is another one from Colessi. So essentially, I think what we're seeing here is a kind of militarization of society in that late Roman period as an act of resistance against this empire being on your doorstep. And so the question now is, is Tapenoth a unique case? Did we hit the jackpot and there's no other jackpots to hit? Or are there other sites that were like this, these large-scale settlements? Well, this is where we're going down to Fife. And this is East Lomond, Hillfort, overlooking this very rich agricultural area down to Falkland there. Anyone from Falkland? Oh, good. Lovely place. And so this is a really impressive hill fort here, although much smaller than Tapenoth, or at least on the surface. So these are the kind of ramparts plotted out here. And we haven't excavated this. This has never been excavated, this hill fort here. But based on its morphology, you would say it would be a Pictish site, maybe 7th, 8th century AD. But less than 10 years ago, this annex settlement to the south of the hill fort was identified here through things like geophysical survey. So this is a kind of plot of features under the ground here, and various community archaeology projects from 2014 to 2019, before we got involved, began to really set the scene for the kind of richness of the archaeology here. So this is from 2014 excavations, finding lots of hearths, very much like the we find at Tapenoth, these kind of stacked multiple hearths from sub-rectangular buildings, and the early radiocarbon dates again centering on that kind of late Roman time period, and some very nice finds, things like pins, and also very unusual, again, evidence of some sort of contact with the Roman world. So things like Nene Valley pottery, which is the same stuff we get at Tapenoth, Oxfordshire ware, all coming from southern England, a coin of the 4th century from the hill here, and so very unusual contacts with the Roman world again. Whether this is through trade or raiding, difficult to tell. And the sequence goes on, just like Tapenoth, into the 5th, 6th and 7th centuries. So we've got things like crucibles for metalworking, ingot molds again, so very reminiscent of what we're finding at Rhynie. And we also have imported pottery. So this is eware coming from Western France, and this dates to the 6th or 7th century AD. And this is very unusual material, again, normally only found at early royal sites in the early medieval period. And then one of the star finds from those early excavations was a spearhead. And so we got involved in the project in 2022 to continue the work, and our early trenches were focused on the rampart wall that encloses this large settlement. And we found dates of 3rd to the 6th century for that rampart, and we found loads of settlement evidence inside. Just like Tapanoff, multiple hearths from multiple buildings all stacked up on one another. Evidence for some of these being sub-rectangular. And then this year we dug within the kind of heart of the settlement. So this is the fort up here, this is the wall of the annex settlement, this is the geophysics results, and this is our trench. And it was a very small trench, it was 10 metres by 10 metres. And this is our team in the beautiful Scottish summer here. And this was our trench. It was 10 by 10 metres, so smaller than this room. And we found 17 different hearths within that trench, and we didn't even bottom it. And you think each one of those hearths represents a building that this would have been at the heart of. So very dense settlement, huge numbers of finds, including complete quernstones for grinding grain. This is our very excited students assembling their finds on our kitchen floor here. No expense spared. And we got this amazing sequence, which I'll just flash through, which is all the different hearths from different layers, metalworking areas here, including fine metalworking. We had casting of pins, and then one of the star finds was this, which looks like a doorknob from a door. And that's what it's called. It's a doorknob spear butt. So it's the base of a Pictish spear. And if you remember back to the warrior carvings, you can maybe just make out on this picture that they have these almost like doorknob style butts to the spears there. So this is the Colessi warrior. So that's 7 kilometres from East Lomond. And I think we've got about 4 of these known from Scotland. So this is a very rare find indeed. And now we have almost the full set with the spear head and the spear butt. And so we'll be able to, I think by the end of the project, we'll be able to provision a whole cast of Pictish warriors, I think, from the finds here. And then what's really intriguing is the radiocarbon dates from East Lomond, which are almost a complete match for what we've got at Tapanoff. So that's 200 AD again, starts in the 3rd century, goes through to about 600 AD. So again, emerging in that late Roman period in the 3rd century, exactly the time period in which the Romans mentioned this new enemy, and it goes through into the post-Roman period, into about the mid-7th century in this case. So there you can see this is the start date of Tapanoff, and this is the start date for East Lomond. They're almost identical. So these 2 major settlements are taking off in the same century, around about, within a couple of generations of Severus's campaigns within lowland Scotland. Oh, right, are you keeping up? Right, 3rd part of the lecture, we're going up to the Moray coast, to Burghead, and here we're going to be talking about the kind of later period of the Picts. So this site is a promontory fort, and it dates to the 7th to the 9th centuries AD, so the kind of end of the Pictish period, in the period in which these Picts were Christian. This was the largest Pictish fort known prior to the discovery of Tapanoff, so I had to break that to the locals in Burghead. Sorry, Burghead. But still a very, very impressive site. It's got this upper fort, so this is what it looks like today, and this is our kind of reconstruction drawing overlaid on top. And then a lower fort here, where it had landward defences, and it had ramparts going all the way along the edge of the sea end as well. And this lay at the heart of Fortrue, which was one of the major kingdoms of Pictland. Unfortunately, during the 19th century, at least half of the fort was destroyed by the construction of the modern town. And during that destruction, they found carvings of bulls. So there's 6 bull carvings known. There was probably 30 found. One's in the British Museum, one in the National Museum, and the others are held locally in Elgin and Burghead. But there's also early Christian sculpture. So the Picts were Christian at least from the 7th century AD. So there's fragments of cross slabs, a box shrine, and a whole series of early Christian art. And the reason that we're excavating here is because part of the fort is falling into the sea. So this is an increasing problem across Scotland in terms of rising sea levels because of climate change and increased storminess. And so we've lost a huge chunk of the rampart that enclosed the upper fort here. And so we're just rescuing what's left in this area of the fort. So it's a big opportunity actually to investigate a big part of this fort here. So essentially we're going to excavate this whole area here prior to this erosion getting worse. And so this is one of our trenches from 2022. What's the natural topography of this headland was that it sloped down towards the beach, which would have been over here somewhere in the Pictish period. And they built the rampart on that slope and then filled it up with sand up against the wall. So we've got amazing preservation of the Pictish wall, which still stands up to about 4 metres high in places here. And you can see the timber lacing within the fort. And part of it has been burnt down, so late phase seems to have been destroyed by fire. And then this year we got to the lower citadel rampart. It only survived about 7 courses high because it didn't have that sand built up against it. So you can imagine just as the timber framework decayed, the whole thing collapsed essentially. And so this is the first time this has been seen since the 19th century. So there were excavations in the 1890s by Hugh Young. You can see the same wall face there. And then this is his workmen in the background who clearly were told to get out the photograph and be in the background there. So yeah, this is the first time we've seen this since the 19th century. So this is quite hard work, so we need a lot of the local brew to help us along there. And we had our local volunteer, this is one of our local volunteers, John Ralph, who grew up in Burghead, who was excavating along with us. Essentially, all the deposits up against the lower rampart there date to the 7th to 8th centuries. So as Tappernauth and Rhynie declined in its fortunes, this site was really just getting going. And basically wherever we dig in Burghead, there's buildings all over the place, including underneath the modern houses. This is a 8th and 9th century building that goes underneath Edward, who lives in the Coast Guard station, goes underneath his greenhouse there. So we're just trying to persuade him to knock his greenhouse down and put in a good word for us. And then in his garden as well, this is where we started off digging. Pretty much our first test bit, we came down on the floor of a 9th century building. So again, you can see this is the turf wall, and this is the floor layers, the hearth here, the wall of another Pictish building here, wall of another Pictish building there, and all this dark deposits are the occupation inside the house here. And then down in the lower citadel, this will probably make no sense whatsoever, but this is a kind of illustration of all the different buildings. There's one here, there's one here, there's a building here, there's a building there, there's buildings all over the place. So again, it was jam-packed full of settlement, this later Pictish fort. Again, it was producing high-status metalwork, including weaponry. So we've got spearheads, bits of swords, crucible molds for melting down precious metals. And it's got these amazing finds that come from Anglo-Saxon England at Burghead. This is very, very strange in terms of this material's found in the Danelaw and found in Wessex, but it's not generally found in Scotland whatsoever. So we've got coins of the Bishop Wigmund of York from the 840s or 850s. Ethelred II of Northumbria, and we've got 3 coins now of the famous King Alfred of Wessex. And you can see these have been pierced for wearing or for mounting. So again, the Picts didn't have a coin economy, so they're literally wearing their wealth or sticking on some objects here. So it's very intriguing how this material got to Burghead. And this year we found another Northumbrian coin from a floor layer of a building. It was just next to the modern building here. So an in situ floor again with again metalworking evidence and a coin. There was an antiquarian find from the 19th century of a blast horn. So this is something a warrior would have had, a very high status warrior, that again comes from Anglo-Saxon England. And you can see on some of the picture sculpture you get these mounted warriors. So this is kind of thing that they would be carrying, the kind of elite, again possibly royal leaders in this time period. But we're also getting amazing preservation of more everyday objects. So we tend to get very poor bone preservation in Scotland because of acidic soils. But at Burghead, because of the sands and the sheer amount of bone we're getting there, we're getting things like bone combs. So this is a double-sided comb. You often see double-sided combs on picture stones again. We're finding needles, decorated pins. This one's got a charred end to it to make it look like it's got a jewel. So these are tiny, this size. They're probably for, very fine clothing or for hair decoration. This one's got a head of a ram. You see that? With its Princess Leia style buns there, eye, and the mouth there. So amazingly beautiful objects of the kind you don't normally get preserved. And then our star finds from 2 years ago was this incredible ring here, which you can see has got this kind of Christian imagery. It's got a cross here, and it's got a garnet or a glass setting in the middle, and it's complete. That's a very unusual find. As archaeologists, we normally find the rubbish that's been thrown away, but someone has, clearly lost this very precious object. It's from the floor of a building. And then this year, we found another fragment of the same type of ring. So they're clearly producing these on site. A finger ring here, bits of decorated metalwork. And then we're slowly building up the radiocarbonates from Burghead. Again, we're able to pin down the start and end dates here. So it's starting somewhere around about 600 AD, again when Tapenoth and East Lomond's beginning to wind down. And it goes on to the late 9th century. And the late 9th century is when we get lots of recorded Viking attacks on Pictland. And within a generation or so, the Picts are no more. And it's references to a new kingdom called Alba, which seems to be merging the Scots of Dalriata and the Picts of the East. So very much like England, it looks like these kingdoms are adapting to take on this new enemy in this late 9th century context. And this is when this site gets either destroyed or abandoned in that time period. So I'll just sum up that, and then we'll move on to something a bit more local. So I think what we can see here is that we've got these big changes to society in the 3rd and 4th century. In the same time period that our terminology in our classical sources changes for the people north of the frontier. So this new enemy is identified. And these fortified centres really lie at the heart of elite culture in the north. And we can see that these begin to develop in that 3rd and 4th century context, and they become the heart of elite culture into the Pictish period. And when we do begin to get sites references in our sources for Pictland, they often are hill forts or promontory forts. These were the elite centres of that time period. Right, so what you've all came for, to hear something a bit more local. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about local sites, but I'm going to mention one in particular. But if we're looking at the Picts of the Highlands and Moray and west of that, then we've got various kind of references to parts of the geography that we'd be familiar with, even in the Pictish period. So in the Pictish period, in the Pictish King list, it mentions areas like Kate, which is presumably Caithness, and places like Orkneys turn up as well. And the area that we're in today was probably part of this kingdom called Fortrue, which extended from Moray probably all the way over to Easter Ross here. And this seems to have been the most powerful kingdoms located here before, in the 9th and 10th century, power seems to shift down to kind of central Scotland, down here. So these parts of the world would have been very significant in that earlier Pictish time period. Given we don't have an awful lot of settlement sites, we have to use things like the symbol stones. So we've got symbol stones spread right along the Spey here. It's a very notable concentration here. And again, this might be the kind of edge of that kingdom, Fortrue here. And there's another kingdom or region called Kay, as in kind of part of the place name of Benihee, which is located around here. So you've got a different concentration of clustering of symbol stones around about the Don and the Uri there. And so we've got the Spey here, and then a series of stones up near Burghead and the like, and then one's concentrated around the River Ness, which we know in the 6th century was the location of King Berthay's stronghold, which is mentioned in the life of Columba. So the thing that I wanted to mention or talk about tonight was the kind of fairly recent excavations that we did at Croft Gowan, which is a barrow cemetery. So as well as settlement sites, we do occasionally identify cemetery sites where the Picts were burying their dead. These again were very difficult to identify. There were almost no burials known from the 1970s, and they began to be identified more commonly from 1980s onwards, but still relatively few of these have been excavated. And one of the largest of these cemeteries is Croft Gowan, which is located between here and Aviemore. And it's a cemetery of almost 40 barrows. And so this is a transcription of aerial photographs. So they're not visible on the ground today, or largely not. And they were low mounds that were square in shape or sometimes round. A few of these at Croft Gowan, you can actually just make out the kind of upstanding elements of the barrows here, which is quite unusual. And these covered single graves in general, so single inhumations. And they generally date from the 5th century through to the 7th century. So again, in that kind of immediate post-Roman time period. And so, as I say, very few of these cemeteries have been dug. So this was a great project. It was funded by the HLF. And was, again, a collaboration between local volunteers and Aberdeen students and staff. And we excavated these barrows. Sorry, that's just a location. I'm sure most of you know where this is. It's just near the river, which is a kind of classic location for these barrow cemeteries. They're often at crossing points or routeways across the landscape here. So these are what they look like when you take off the topsoil. You can see the cuts where they've created the ditches to create the soil to create the mound, and over time those mounds have been ploughed away. And then the graves were dug into the subsoil and individuals placed within the graves here. And they're this really quite amazing monument. So as you can see here, they've got this square barrow. The mound would have been in the middle, covering over this grave. And then this one has been added onto it. You see this? Ditches are kind of butting up against this barrow here. So this looks like there's a primary burial, and then this one's been added. So were these two people related? Perhaps. And then later on, this one is cut through the ditch of that early barrow. So the sequence is this one, then this one's added, and then this one's right up against these earlier mounds here. And so we were able to excavate two of the graves, and one from another part of the cemetery as well. Again, generally, we don't get good preservation of bone, but we did have parts of the skull preserved, and then this is quite a remarkable image. This is a body stain, so this is not actually human remains. This is just the stain in the soil that the body is left behind. But you can see how closely together the legs are here. So it looks like they've been, in some sort of shroud or tightly bound within the grave. But remarkably, we did get material to date even this example, and because we had preserved human remains, we were able to date these examples, and we were also able to extract material for ancient DNA and for isotopes. And this is part of Lucy Coster, who's a PhD student with us in Aberdeen, doing this work. And so these are the dates. They date from the 5th century through to about 600 AD. So sometime in the late 5th or 6th century, these individuals were interred in these graves. It's harder to get more accurate dates on kind of just individual events like that. But sometime within that 5th or 6th century, these individuals were placed in the ground here. And as I say, we've got some ancient DNA material. This is from Francis Crick Institute and our own researchers. And amazingly, even though the human remains were very poorly preserved, we got a fantastic sequence from those individuals. And you'll be disappointed to tell you, I can't really tell you much about that so far. We don't have the full results. But essentially, it looks like they have the kind of haplogroups that are common to Iron Age society in the British Isles. So they're relatively local in the grand scheme of things. But we'll get a lot more data on that in the coming months and years. So as well as looking at kind of genetic history, what you can also do is look at their isotopes. Basically you are what you eat, and the chemical signature of what you've eaten and the groundwater that you've drunk. We can analyse that through the bones. So you can see here, this is a plot of local cattle, sheep, various other animals, and also the two skeletons that we analysed through this. And essentially, it shows that their diet was almost completely terrestrial. So it was land-based resources and agricultural resources was what they were eating. And then in terms of mobility, you can also track where these people grew up and where they died. Were they local or not? And so again, we've got a couple of individuals here. One seems to have grown up locally and died locally, or at least as far as we can tell from the geology. Another one seems to be a bit more exotic, and they came from somewhere marked in orange here. And this is based on geology, basically. So they came from the west coast, maybe even from Shetland, and died at Croftgown in the 5th or 6th century. So they came from these areas in their childhood, but then in their latter years they were living locally in Croftgown, and that's where they died. So it's amazing that you can begin to track these things. And so over time we'll get more results like this, and you'll be able to look at things like what was the level of mobility within the society, what were they eating, was there any difference in diet and status, and what was their genetic history. So watch this space. Lucy is just writing up her PhD just now, so we should have the results soon. Right, so that is pretty much me, other than to say thank you for listening. A lot of our work has been funded by people very generously donating some money to the university. So if you've got any spare money, we could look after it for you very well. We also have a merch line, which helps us support our project models here. So check out our website. Oh, and did I mention we've got a book out as well? Yeah, you can follow our project at Northern Picts on Facebook, maybe on Twitter. And we now have a Blue Sky account for that means anything as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, there you go. Now you know.
What I was thought on you.
I suspect there are a large number of questions. I know that Gordon put his foot in the door when he was immediately collared by a couple of people. I suspect there's a huge number of questions. Traditionally, the way we kind of work is that we're happy, assuming Gordon's happy to take questions, for a few general questions, and then you'll not get out until you've answered 275 more on your way
That's
home.
fine.
But just one, if I might start, the only local excavations we've got of any significance were when they built the new distillery, and there was an archaeological survey, and the buildings were round with post holes.
Yeah.
Does that suggest that just as in the earlier times that there was a coexistence between the two cultures, traditions?
No, they'll be earlier. So roundhouses are very common finds, but they almost exclusively date from sort of the mid-Bronze Age, maybe about 1500 BC, through to about the 2nd century AD. So they're the kind of structures and buildings that people lived in for almost 2,000 years. And then round about 200 AD, we get this, complete absence of settlement. And that's when they seem to be shifting to these different forms of architecture, these rectangular buildings and these kind of turf-built and cruck frames. So there's definitely something that's causing that change within
I'm
society.
sure somebody will keep me right, but I seem to recall that some of those buildings were dated as well into the first millennium.
Okay, yeah. I mean, very occasionally you do get Pictish circular buildings as well, but they're very, very rare.
Evidence of ironworking and square making and so on that site.
Yeah.
But I think probably there's lots and lots of opportunity for archaeological surveys.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Come and work with us.
Happy to, yeah.
Burning questions. Yeah.
Well, I go, fascinating stuff. I've got the book, so. But, I just, obviously you've got to react to opportunities, but plans for the future? Have you anything you've got your eye on?
Oh God, I think we could keep going for forever if we can get the funding. So we have got 2 more years at Birkhead, so that's been funded by Historic Environment Scotland as part of the coastal erosion issue there. So we're very glad that they were able to support us on that. East Lomond, we're committed for at least 3 more years there, and we could go on for decades there because we've just scratched the surface really. Then we started doing work in Shetland. Some of you might have seen us on TV on Landward, getting blown off a sea stack in Shetland. So I mean, it's still difficult to identify Pictish sites. There's still relatively few. But equally, again, the amount of archaeology we've done is tiny, so huge opportunities to investigate more and find out more. So I think it's a really exciting time period to study the Picts, and after that, warning off of never study the Picts, because that's where nothing lies, or where madness lies. Things have really started to turn around, so it's great. The challenge is always just getting the money to do these things and to keep on doing what we're doing.
I'm presuming that there wasn't a written culture with the Picts. So from all the picture stones that you're seeing, it seems to be very much based on the natural world. Is there any iconography that we can work out from that, or is it that they're just drawing what they see?
Yeah, I could have had a whole other lecture talking just about the symbols. I don't know if we've got any images. But there almost certainly was a written culture. So we have a few sources, things like the Pictish King lists that were written within Pictland. But we also have inscriptions in stone, inscriptions in Latin, inscriptions in Ogham or Ogham, which are probably giving us names of people. And things like Port Mahomet, the excavations at the monastery there, they found evidence for vellum production, so they're probably producing books at these major monastic sites as well. But for whatever reason, very few of the sources survive. As for the symbols themselves, our best bet is that they are some sort of naming system. So on some of the later stones, you see individuals and they're marked by the symbols, usually a pair of symbols. And so our best guess is that that's telling you something about their rank or their identity, and maybe most likely their name. Most inscriptions and inscribed systems in Europe in this time period is usually about marking people's names. But you're right in terms of it's still interesting what symbols they used. So it is more or less wild animals that they use for most of the symbols, with a few exceptions. So yeah, it's interesting to see what they chose in terms of how to depict names, if that's what these symbols are doing. So yeah, it's really fascinating. And the animal moulds from Rhynie are amazing, really, in terms of showing that iconography of the wild animals, and maybe the hunt was much more widely dispersed. It wasn't just on the symbol stones. They're clearly making kind of little material culture versions of the animals you see on the symbol stones, and that's really cool. Again, unfortunately, we don't have the objects themselves. We've just got the moulds that were used to make these.
Are you going to try and cast anything from any of the moulds?
Well, we can't do that, but but a couple of years back we got an artist from Edinburgh Art College, and she laser scanned the moulds and then 3D printed them, and she cast this. I think it was this one, and it's a beautiful boar. You can see the crest. You can see its little tusks. Thanks. And they're in this running pose, so that they look fantastic. And she cast them in silver. Something else we need to add to our merch line, I think.
Okay, so what on earth are these people doing living up to the top of hills? You'd water, food, fuel. In winter, you would hardly be able to move around once the snow came down. So, what's the explanation?
Yeah, no, it's really intriguing, isn't it? It does seem bonkers to us, but I think one element of society is conflict. So our references to the Picts, and we have things like the Annals of Ulster that record events, and a large proportion of our recorded events are battles and sieges, particularly of hill forts. So there's no doubt that these were attacked in early medieval society. So it could well partly be security, but it is hard to get our heads around. I mean, we have been toying with the idea of the site. Is it some sort of seasonal gathering location? And we do know this as something that happens in early medieval society. It's called assembly, and you come and you give tribute to your king. You come and trade. You come and find yourself a marriage partner. So it could be, a kind of seasonal site. The kind of Glastonbury of the early medieval world. But having said that, if you look at the amount of labour that's gone into building these platforms, this 1.5 kilometre circumference rampart, which held a big wooden fence or a rampart here, the amount of investment is colossal for something that would be only used for a couple of days per year. So we think it is a permanent settlement. But yeah, that brings challenges in terms of having enough water. But the Picts are slave traders, and they have slaves. we often romanticise the Picts, but I wouldn't want to live in the Pictish period. So there's all manner of means in which this community can be serviced, but it must be because of tribute and resources coming in from a much wider catchment. But this is how these kingdoms begin to take shape. That's what they're doing, is they're collecting tribute from a large area, and that's what conflict's all about. It's trying to take over more territory. You can increase your tribute, you become more powerful, but it's high risk, and these sites get attacked and destroyed. There's a site called Denali, which is not a Pictish site, but it's in Dalriada, and there's about, I think there's 6 references within a period of 20 years of this site being destroyed, reconstructed, destroyed, under siege, destroyed. So these kings are in high-risk positions. Again, I don't know why you'd want to be a king in this time period. You've got a very high chance of being killed in battle or killed by your own family or own followers. So, it's very intriguing.
There's a well in the middle of Burghead.
Mm-hmm.
I think they call it a Roman well or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing special with it.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that is an amazing structure. It's often called the Roman well, but it's almost certainly of the Pictish period, probably 7th, 8th, 9th century. There it is in the reconstruction drawing. It's really, really impressive, and there's nothing really known of this scale in other early medieval forts. And there's the scale of the ramparts of Burghead. It's about 8 metres wide, 6 metres high. Again, the investment in labour in these places is just absolutely incredible. And every 30 centimetres within these ramparts, there were timber framing going along the wall face into the wall. Think of the amount of resources used to build these ramparts. And we know from early medieval Ireland and early medieval England in this time period, part of your duty to your king is to help build the ramparts of their forts. All these constructions are just testament to the amount of resources that have been invested in these places of kingship and elite residence.
Is that the well that's in somebody's garden?
More or less, yeah.
It's behind a wooden,
Yeah.
an iron grill of some.
Yeah, it's walled off because it's quite dangerous. But it's really impressive. So we usually dig at Burghead late August, early September, and we always have an open day where you can come and visit the well and visit our excavations. So come along and check it out this year. Coming in.
I've waded down, Trousers off, as far as I dare, because it's often been said that it's a baptism.
Yeah.
But it's scary because once you get to the bottom of the steps, it obviously just plunges. I don't know how deep, so I wouldn't like to get baptized.
Yeah, I'd love to drain it and record it. It would be amazing.
I'm just trying to choose which questions to ask. But, so the hearths that you talked about, that's really, I just wonder what the depth profile is in terms of, you kind of think if there's something substantial like a hearth there that they would reuse it. So what's going on with those? You said there's quite some hearths that are almost on top of each other.
Yeah, this at both East Lomond and Tappanoth, it's incredible. So there's a hearth there, there's a hearth there, there's another one on top. So you can find Tappanoth. And they do the same thing there. You can see a hearth here, and there's another one peeking out underneath. It's incredible. Sometimes they partly dismantle them, especially the curbstones at the edges of the hearth, and they reuse those curbstones. I think sometimes the stones get so far cracked that you couldn't really reuse them. They're building one on top of another, and that sequence can go from the 3rd century through to the 6th century. So again, it's incredible thickness of deposits there. So again, it doesn't suggest that these are just used a couple of days per year or whatever. They do look like proper houses and structures. And we got very poor bone preservation at Tappenoff and East Lomond. But we did have things like horse teeth from underneath these hearths here. And you can analyse the teeth of the horses, and they were eating barley, which is sort of thing you might do when you're overwintering animals. So again, maybe suggest that they've got their animals up on the hill there, and they're actually overwintering them on the hill, which again is just mind-boggling in terms of thinking about the scale and intensity of settlement. It must have been, I don't know, like Glastonbury in terms of filth.
Would some of the hearths have perhaps been sort of domestic and some for metalworking?
Yeah.
So side by side, you could have
absolutely.
two separate hearths.
Well, or even the same hearths, when that structure goes use as a hearth, sometimes they reuse older buildings as metalworking huts and things like that, because you don't really want to be having your children running around while you're blacksmithing, etc. But yeah, at Tappenoff we have hearths that got clay moulds and crucible sherds from metalworking on the hearths there. So yeah, some of them are other types of buildings at least for some of their life history. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many people lived there at any one time?
Yeah, so there's at least 800 house platforms on the hill. So your guess is as good as mine. Let's say 400 of them are contemporary. And certainly there's very little evidence for, overlapping structures. And they're built right up against the rampart here, so it suggests that there's not much space in the interior. So say 400 contemporary, 5 people per house, you're talking about 2,000 people. If 800 are contemporary, then you're talking about 4,000, It's huge, absolutely huge. But why build a 1.5 kilometre circumference rampart if you don't have a huge community to contain? So it's a bit of guesswork, really, in terms of thinking of population, but it must have been big. Yeah.
Do you have any DNA evidence to link Pictish people with other peoples or with present day?
It's very slowly emerging. So, as I say, we don't have a huge number of well-preserved skeletons from Pictland, and ancient DNA analysis is very expensive. But it's slowly emerging. The general picture is quite boring in terms of they do look like they're locals, they're related to the Iron Age populations over here. Because, Bede, for example, talks about the Picts coming from Scythia, which is like Ukraine. But it's like an origin myth, clearly, but where the Picts came from. But yeah, the DNA work so far suggests they're relatively local. Some of the isotopic work suggests that at least some of the Picts are coming from the west coast and moving over to the east, which might explain the kind of language changes that happened within Pictland and move to using Gaelic. So it's early days, but yeah, it will start to emerge. Loads of people get their genetic tests these days, and some of the less scrupulous testing companies will say that you're 10% Viking or 5% Pictish and the like, but to be honest, it's pretty much nonsense at this stage until we begin to build up the ancient DNA databases, and then we can maybe begin to match that on to modern day patterns. So again, watch this space in terms of that. Research will begin to emerge over the next few years, I think.
Is there any evidence of having a distinctive dress, or was it just similar to the rest of the stuff, apart from the winter theme?
As in what they wore?
Yes.
The Picts, yeah. Well, if you believe some of the sculpture, then, and believe some of the Roman counts, then they are. Let me just find the slide. Then they're naked. So the Romans talk about that, the Caledonii being naked in battle. I'm very sceptical of that. Clearly not, being out in Fife in August. But other carvings, like Rainy Man, for example, shows these kind of short tunics. These I don't know if this is some sort of headdress here, but they seem to, broadly correlate to early medieval dress we find elsewhere. Some of the sculpture from the later periods show these incredible robes and fancy garments, and again that must be some of the kind of elite dress that's being worn there. And if they're importing things like pottery, etc., they're probably importing fabrics and silks even. Who knows? Again, that's not something that tends to get well preserved. There is a hood that comes from Orkney, which is like a hooded garment with kind of tassels that come down. So occasionally you get glimpses of what they would have worn. But yeah, I think we're a fair way away from knowing exactly what they wore so far, unless we find a great bog body somewhere. It would be fantastic. Yeah.
A couple more, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, happy to go as long as you guys want to go. Yeah.
For example, could you take it back to the picture with the spear?
From East Lomond?
Yeah, I think it was the one with the spear. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
What's your thinking on that doorknob end on the spear? Because in a way it doesn't make sense, because it doesn't help as a thrusting weapon, does it?
So I've talked to there's a guy called Paul MacDonald, who is a modern day weaponsmith, and he's made a few of these spears, and he says it's really good for weighting it. So it's basically it's for weighting when you're fighting hand to hand. He thinks, but the Romans also mention the Caledonii having these spears, which have a circular butt, and they say that they had stuff inside them that rattled. So it's almost like psychological warfare or something. I don't know whether that's true or not. The one we found is hollow, certainly, so you could have had something inside. But they are quite small as well. The ones shown in sculpture, I suspect, are quite exaggerated in terms of size. The more common, I'm saying more common, the other form of spear butt you get, and we have these examples from East Lomond as well, it's just basically a spike, and so it's just presumably for resting in the ground. Again, we haven't had a huge amount of weaponry from this time period, but slowly we're beginning to get insights into things like their sword types, their spear types, etc. The sword, for example, from Burghead is the hilt is tiny, so it's like the Irish styles of sword, which are really short blades for thrusting type attacks, rather than the big long bladed weapons that the Vikings had. So when the Vikings turned up, the Picts had their tiny swords. That must have been interesting. But the Pictish swords are for use while you have a spear, and the majority of carvings where you see weaponry is spear carriers rather than swords, and so spears do seem to be the kind of weapon choice in Pictland. And there were throwing spears as well. That I kind of paired the spearhead with the spear butt, but actually the spearhead is tiny, so it could be a throwing spear rather than a hand-to-hand fighting spear.
Maybe the rattle went along with the carnage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is. Well, if it's true, then yeah, presumably it is about.
We love the carnage here because we've had it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Not far from the fine spot. Yeah. Mm.
I saw happening somewhere.
You're exhausted.
But lots.
I just wanted to mention the coins that you talked about, because that's really quite bizarre to, and they're also over quite a long period, aren't they? You mentioned the latest one was from Alfred, which was 800, and the earlier ones were from a few centuries previous to that.
Yeah,
I think said. They're all eight. So is that what's your educated guess on that? Is it because there would have been trading by sea, I guess, so the into the firth there. So, but you said that these are quite late. So you mentioned earlier that they didn't have a money system. So
this is
the start of some trading, or do you think?
This is probably. I mean, with the exception of this, which looks like it's decorating something. These coins are probably bullion. They're melting down to make other stuff. And again, it's just the odd one that they've dropped. That's what we find. But yeah, it's really intriguing. So yeah, it goes from the 830s, 840s through to the 870s. So it could be kind of long-term trade over decades. But when the Vikings attack a place like Wessex and York, these are the coins that you find in possession of the Great Army that arrives in England in the 860s, and therefore this could be coming from Great Army activity. And we know that parts of the Great Army came up into Scotland to fight the Picts and the Britons and other groups. So yeah, it's intriguing.
Threw money at them.
Threw money at them. Well, I mean, there's loads of possibilities. Are they hiring Pictish mercenaries, either in the Viking armies or in the Anglo-Saxon armies? Is this just trade with a huge settlement? Certainly, the other kind of stuff we're finding in Burghead suggests crafting and producing, so it could be trade down that east coast. But yeah, I think lots of things to mull over there. I'm not going to commit myself to any one particular idea yet, but loads of ideas to think about.
I think everything you find is a gift. It's a wonderful opportunity to find. Is there anything particular that you would love to find?
I don't know. I think we've been incredibly lucky, and for me, it's not the individual finds. For me, it's the stories that you can tell from the structures, the buildings, the sequence, the radiocarbon dates, the genetic evidence. All of that ties in to tell us a broader story about the Picts. So I love when our diggers find nice things, because it keeps morale going in something that's quite a difficult, physical labour task. But for me, it's the broader picture. That's important.
And finally, because of this great cluster of sculptured stones we've got, because of various burial grounds that are beginning to come, was this perhaps a significant centre in some way or other, or as you suggest, just the edges of something bigger? I think we were very important.
Well, I'm not going to be able to say no and get out here alive, am I? So, I think wherever you get concentrations of Pictish stones, there's a good chance there's something pretty important going on there. I mean, that's been actually lies at the heart of a lot of our work, is identifying that site has got a lot of Pictish stones, what's going on there. And that's what led us to Rhynie. There was 8 of those symbol stones, which is, I think, the largest concentration known. And so we were like, well, what's going on there? Not in our wildest dreams did we think we'd find what we did there. And the same with Dunacair, that's where we went to that strange sea stack, was there was 5 or 6 of those symbol stones had been found in the 19th century and thrown into the sea. So like, why on earth were they on that sea stack? What was that? And it turns out it was a very eroded promontory fort. So yeah, it's always the first clue, I think. But the problem with the symbol stones is they're often moved around through time. And so it's very rare that you get one still in situ. The cross stains at Rhynie was again exceptional in terms of still being its original place. So yeah, it's a really important clue, and I'm sure it means that Strathspey is really important in that earlier Pictish period for sure. Yeah.
Again, watch the space.
Watch the space.
Well, a word perhaps.
I think we've had a fascinating talk tonight. Subject, of course, is way beyond any of our recollections of family history going back 200 or 300 years.
And he's been known to our family for over 40 years, I think, since we moved to Fraserburgh in 1979. The youngest son, Murray, and Gordon, had a long relationship through primary, secondary, and tertiary education, and kept close friends ever since. So thank you very much indeed, Gordon, for giving up your time, driving 2 hours from home in Aberdeen. And I hope you have a safe journey home in this dark, horrible evening with work again. But also, I was fascinated with how the people migrated from the West. And I have always felt that lots of societies realised they had too much inbreeding. They were maybe trying to spread the genetic pool around, And it's very, very common in the Highlands, inbreeding. There's lots of people with Down syndrome, there's probably a bigger percentage than that. The communities stayed insular and just inbred and crossbred among relatives. So can we all join in giving him a wonderful round of applause, and we'll hopefully see him again, maybe.
Yes.